Moving forward, we now shift our focus to the evolution of European governance. Our next distinguished guest is a member of the European Parliament and a former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. Please welcome Mr. Michael van der Schulenburg for a featured talk on how the EU transitioned from a peace project to a war project.
Thank you very much. It will be very difficult for me to make this speech now. Or I listened to you very carefully. I spent all my professional life in countries with wars. I'm very strong pro-UN Charter. I think that is the best document we ever in human history we have developed. I also believe in the rule of law, but based on the UN Charter and not vaguely. And this is very important for me. Now, when I listen, and I really don't want to hurt anybody, but in the wars I've been, maybe not as well spoken as you, but the arguments you make, you usually hear on both sides of a war. It is just what it is. It is also on the Ukrainian war. It is very often he is the aggressor. He started the war, he does nasty things, he wants to destroy us, and so on. He rapes women, he takes kills prisoners. It is very often the same thing. We had once with a very important Under-Secretary General who sort of put me on the way and says, when you negotiate between parties, it's a little bit like a butterfly. What you see in the butterfly is the wings, because they flutter and, they go very well. That's what you see. And that is basically what we call the war narratives each state has and must have, because otherwise they couldn't act as they do. But of course, the interesting thing is, when you put these two wings together, you see that the signs on both sides of the butterflies are actually quite equal. Now, this is what he says then is, that's why you should not concentrate on the wings. What you have to try to find, the head of the butterfly, because if you negotiate peace between parties, you have to see why there is this war. And the war is never discussed in narratives governments give. It is always far deeper and oft even not mentioned. And that is the little head of the butterfly. Where is the head and what is it? And if you look at butterflies very often, you can't find the head very easy. This is what it is. And if we would have now here Iranians, I'm not defending Iran at all, but they would probably say something very similar. I'm sure they don't speak as well as you do, but I think they would probably do something very similar. That means what I want to say with this is, if we follow your logic on freedom and things like this, you basically have to conquer the whole world. Where do you want to stop? Why do you want to stop with Iran? Why not then Saudi Arabia? Now, you say you fight with them, but if it's for freedom, you may fight them too. Why not Russia? Why not China? The problem is in the UN Charter, what we have done in the UN Charter, that it has never determined what the political system in any country is. And it is something they have covered from the Germans after the Münster Peace Treaty. The Münster Peace Treaty made a very little trick in order to build one pillar, which is still in the UN Charter, in which it says sovereign equality, non-interference in the internal affairs of another state. This was how the 30-year war was ended. It was nothing to do with justice, had nothing to do, the Protestants thought the Catholics are the devils, and the other ones saw that same thing. This is what it was. We allowed each country to decide their own system, and that you should not meddle with the system. Now, we have done what you describe a lot. There is a statistics by the US Congress, which says that between 92, that means the Wolfowitz Doctrine, which then set off the unipolar world, rule of not anymore the charter, but the rules-based order and things like this one, 30 years to 2022. The United States had intervened, according to their own statistics, 251 times militarily in other countries. All these justifications are very similar. It's always for freedom and democracy. But one thing they never achieved: freedom and democracy. You cannot send me a single example of the 251 military interventions which has improved democracy in these countries, has helped the rule of law, and has created better economic conditions. What we have in these countries is usually left chaos, anarchy, and a lot of human sufferings. Look at them. And you know, these things, these statistics of 250 doesn't even include regime change activities, doesn't even include proxy wars. So the Ukraine war or the war against Yemen from Saudi Arabia would not even be there. So I think we have a history of what you describe, of heavily relying on military interventions to finally do what you say, to bring happiness into Damavand. You know, I lived 3 times in Iran, in the things in sort of. So I think there is a flaw in this things, in the sense that you have, and you must do this. I fully respect this. Defend your way of what you are doing. But I think for us, and I would argue also for the European, I wanted to give a completely different speech, but now I'm going on New Year's, is that, you know, when you look how this war started, it was against national law of the United States, and it was against international law, if we accept there is such a thing as the UN Charter. But what I think much worse is the killing of a leadership of another country while you have peace negotiations. I think if we accept this as a way of bringing freedom to the world, we have to go back to the Middle Ages where these things happened. We have stopped these things, and we should stop these things. And the thing is also, in this case of Iran, and I'm not at all for religious states or anything like this, is that this is something which will hang on, this killing, and it hasn't really created what you had wanted to do. The decapitation has not allowed an uprising among the Iranian people. And I think we have to be all realistic on this one things. If we accept that for how many, 7, 8 days? Whatever, yeah. With every day, the likelihood that this is happening is declining. It's declining. I mean, there's a lot of dissatisfaction in Iran, absolutely, but it is not, and I think it's this military intervention in the way that was done that has basically cut any possibility in Iran to change the system by revolting against them. So I think you have killed any possibility of revolting with the system. And there's also the small things, you know, because I've met, of course, Khomeini things, but these things, you know, the person in Iran, because in Iran has a lot of discussions that we should have a nuclear bomb because they feel the same thing as you feel, that you are such a threat to them, and that's the only way to defend themselves. That's their subjective issue. But the man who was against it is actually Ali Khamenei. He was the one, he issued the fatwa. He was saying that it's not my man, I don't like him because this is, but you know, you killed actually the person there who was actually probably most influential, at least, in saying that the country should not go nuclear. And this is very important, the fatwa. Now, we can say fatwa, you know, most people are not religious, but in Iran it is important. Not that everybody there is religious, not at all. But it is, of course, that the people who are very religious have the power, and they have also the power to make these decisions whether or not you go to develop a nuclear bomb. And that's the fatwa waiver, and that's cut it off. And you know that from the UN, maybe not so important, but the American Secret Service all agree that since 2003, Iran has not tried to build a nuclear bomb. I have no other information, I have just to take it from there. And that is the second thing I want to say. By attacking Iran, you have actually, with the argument of trying not to have the proliferation of nuclear arms, you might have done the opposite. You know, for the Iranians, you could only attack Iranians at this time because they did not have a nuclear weapon or were not close to have one. If they had it, it was probably not be possible, and you would not have done it. If Iran had acted like North Korea, you compare them all this, it was not possible. You would not have attacked North Korea, even if you felt that North Korea is doing nasty things to you. So it means also for the rest of the world, when they see that we attack a country without the UN Charter, without getting any agreement or whatever there, and I want to come this also back, it means that there is only one solution for them, to get nuclear. Turkey, for instance, Saudi Arabia, yeah, maybe Egypt, and there are many other countries who might feel that the ultimate safety, what you also speak about, it, is our nuclear arms. And you know, the problem of our world today is that to produce nuclear arms today with a level of technology and knowledge is far, far easier than it was 20 or 40 years ago. So countries could choose it, could do it in secret. They didn't even have to do an explosion to show that they have nuclear arms. It is a very dangerous issue. And if Iran now, with this experience, and that's not for me at all to defend it, decides to have a nuclear arm, then we are all in very, very, very deep trouble. And I'm not so sure that the values you show us over there is really the future. Now, it is very important, because I think it's a mistake. It's a mistake. You see, the problem, I think, on this war is how this war develops. And, you know, I've seen lots of wars, and I might be absolutely wrong on these things, is not so much the exchange of missiles, each other you do, because you have lost the point where this could be a short war. And that puts your partner, the United States, in deep trouble. Trump has no time, and time in this sense plays for the Iranians. He has the elections very soon. He thought probably that he was in for something very quickly. There would be an uprising. He could throw some more bombs, and the army would go against the Revolutionary Guards and things like this one. It hasn't happened. And I must say, it might, but I think it's very unlikely. Yeah, you can answer. No, I find it very interesting. I hope you mind how I put myself in here in great danger to speak like this one. The thing, I think, you know, when we are in these wars, we think, you know, what is actually the decisive factor in a war? And I think in this war, the decisive factor is what the Iranian population does or doesn't do, and what the American population does or doesn't do, on which you in Israel, unfortunately, will have very little influence. So if in Iran it turns out that the population sticks with the regime, and the regime survives for sufficient time, I think the criticism in the United States for this war might raise exponentially. I mean, already now you have a majority of Republicans which are against the war, and this will, of course, increase with every day, and with all reports that, you know, girls are killed. I mean, this what happens in wars, and I don't want to minimize it, but, you know, this is with the continuation. And, you know, Trump might have to go to Congress to ask for more money for these things, you know, to continue the war. I mean, how is this going to play out? You know, we have midterm elections, and he's very unpopular because he's doing here something which you can see again and again on television, what he said he would not do. Go to war and ask for regime change. Explicitly. That means we have a president who is allied with you, who has lost his political credibility. This is a very, I mean, I find it actually a pity because I quite like certain things from Trump, how he mixed things up. But this is, of course, something for, it's a death knell for any president. You know, this war might have spoiled his presidency. Now, this is something you have to consider. That is not, with other words, the war might not be decided on the battlefield, but it will be decided by people. That's not often the case. I might be, of course, completely wrong. I would like to make a thing also from the European Union. I mean, how I see that, seeing it from Europe. If we throw international law on the side, and there's a lot of discussion about this already before, what Trump says this not, and then the speech by the Prime Minister from Canada, I thought was actually much worse. I mean, almost we have comments in Western press, now finally we are freed of this joke of international law, you know, this all, it's a hypocrisy. It's a, you know, it's strengths. It's strengths that will, in the end, decide, and you mentioned that also several times, you know, the rule of the strongest. The thing is, we have to ask ourselves in Europe, what is if we are not the strongest? Is it still something we want to do? Or is it something that we would like to have a system? And by destroying it, we have actually destroyed something which I think for the West was absolutely essential. You know, rule of law, Matt is not here anymore, he mentioned the Magna Carta, which is all started, you know, the rule of law that you have to, you have a law to do things and, you know, people judge you on this and blah, blah, blah. I mean, that you have rules. Rules you agree among yourselves, which is a law, basically, or things is also done on the international level. Rule of law there is basically the UN Charter and international law in the international level. This is a contribution the West did to the world. It did not come from China. It did not come from any other part of the world. That was our contribution. And I want to tell you something because I once went through a divorce. Why is the state interfering in divorces? Why? It's a family thing. I mean, what, keep the state out, no? But he does. Because if we would apply your rule, or not, you didn't say it, sorry, I didn't want to, but that the rule of the strongest applies. I mean, we would see a lot of killings in divorces. And that's why we put the state and the legal system in divorces in between. And I think the same applies on the international level. And my appeal is not to give up on the UN Charter. It is the greatest document. It is done in 1945, saying never war again. And even if you say that doesn't work, it says that we all member states, all 193 member states, have agreed to negotiate their differences. And because of that, not going to war. We always say it's only not going to war, but the real issue of the UN Charter is negotiate your differences, even if it takes a long time. And that is why it's also such a pity that the decapitation happened 2 days after the negotiations in Geneva, where the Iranians have apparently made great concessions. And we all agreed to have the next session in Vienna. You have not given the negotiations a chance. And therefore, you have to ask yourself, what is actually the objective in this war? Where is for you the head, this little head of the butterfly of where the war is? And maybe we could get them very different answers. Thank you very much.
Now, I would like to ask MCC's Director General Zoltán Szalai to continue the discussion with Mr. Michael von der Schulenburg.
We continue with our program, and then I agreed with the speakers. Then I give, because you were asked many questions, by Michael. So I would give you 5 minutes to respond, and then we would go. Well, you did statements that he would like to react, and after that we would go with our discussions. So I give you the possibility for reaction.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I don't need 5 minutes, but didn't quite plan that you dedicated the speech to me. So in that sense, I feel obligated to make a few remarks. Listening to understand the complete inaptitude of the United Nations to solve conflict. That's what I completely, even more strongly understand listening to you, and why 85% of the United Nations General Assembly resolutions are dedicated to Israel. If we had all equal sides in the world, you wouldn't be picking up on Israel to that extent. And I think in that regard, I'm not surprised to hear it from you. You made a lot of wrong statements, like most Americans don't support the war, 80% of Republicans do, forever wars, etc., the fatwa. We can go on and on. I researched Iran, speak the language. I can tell you 90% way past to nuclear weapons. And the only question remains is that when a country doesn't play by the UN Charter, you let it chair the UN Human Rights Council at one point, Iran, which was a complete low light in the UN history. But talking to all sides implies that all sides are equal, and they fundamentally are not equal. You have one country that develops nuclear weapons to destroy another country, and you have another country that tries to defend itself. I believe the word you're looking for is thank you, because by doing so, Israel is not only defending the Jewish state, it's defending Europe and the West. We tried to negotiate with Iran. The United Nations negotiated with Iran. It failed. They signed a deal in 2015 that they violated. And we see the intelligence that they violated it. So the one question remains. If you have a system that you set up the rules for, the UN Charter, the human rights system, the rules-based international order, that failed to prevent every single war in the past 80 years, there was American blood and treasure that prevented them. The question remains, what do you do with actors that refuse to play by the rules that you set? Your response, your solution is sit and negotiate. But they don't want to negotiate. They want to develop nuclear weapons to destroy Israel and to conquer the Middle East and threaten Europe. If you don't see that, that's fine. But it doesn't mean that the Jewish state can sit idly by and wait for Iran to throw a nuclear weapon on it. And I think this is where we fundamentally differ, is that you see the discussion room and not just the battlefield. And it is true, when you hold a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. That is true. But when you hold a pen, every problem looks like a resolution. And it's fundamentally is not. Some problems, yes, they have military solutions. And I don't see it just as a freedom war. I see it fundamentally as a war to remove a threat. Sometimes you have to act to remove a threat. If the United Nations appreciated what Israel has been doing to remove threats from the West in the past 80 years, I think we would be in a very different place right now.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I didn't attack Israel in this. No, that's not the thing. I'm just saying that we have to see it from both sides. It also on human rights. You know that there are a lot of allegations also against Israel on human rights. I mean, they all have it, and this is this is the first thing I want to say. The second thing is, I think you use the word United Nations false. The United Nations is, as the word says, it's 193 nation states. They're all nation states. It's a nation states organization. It's not a super government. And when then the secretariat sends somebody out, it's the secretariat to this whole thing. It's not a state. It's not a global a government or anything like this one. And I think it should also stay like this one, although there are a lot of plans to thinking that the UN should develop in something. I hope not. I'm very much for nation states. And I think that basically the charter and all these documents are, and that's why they all take such a long time, is where then the 193 have to agree to. So it is a law that these states give themselves. It's not some sort of an bureaucracy that is in New York. It's not that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. We could go on with this. I think for the next summit, it could be a very interesting discussion about this. But I prepared also some questions. So if I allowed, I would go into a different direction. Basically, I would ask first of all about your person, about your history, about your background. Because if someone is knowing German history, your family name is a very well-known German aristocratic name. If I know correctly, 2 of your family members were executed because of political reasons. One of your family members was by the Nazis. Yeah. Not by the Weimar Republic, exactly. And you were born in Munich, so in Western Germany those years, or it was Germany, but it was after the war. And then you were moved with your family to East Germany, and then end of the 60s, you escaped in a very dramatic way from the Hauptstadt of the DDR, of the German Democratic Republic. So what shall we know about this family history, and how did this whole history impress your whole career at the UN?
Actually, I don't really like about talking so much about myself and things like this, but
It's
it's a very difficult history. I mean, my father was born in St. Petersburg. They were there since for 5 generations. After 1807, after the Prussians lost the war against Napoleon, my mother comes from Riga, or Dorpat, actually, more exactly. They came there in the 14th century as a knights of the German knights there, and of course they had afterwards to flee. I mean, we don't know my grandparents because of all these upheavals there, and you know whether they were killed or disappeared. Some we know were killed, and things like this one. So the funny thing is, although I have this whole family background, when I go back home, there's not a single picture of anything, and I know many people have the same experience. It also that my father was first in the working, as a 14-year already in the working camp when the Bolshevik Revolution was, and when he came out, because of our ambassador, German side of the family helped because they knew Stalin, and he had no teeth anymore. I mean, they really had a tough time, and then they arrived shortly before the Hitler time, and both were not regarded as Aryans, which is for me very nice, because I know they couldn't have done anything bad, but at the time, of course, it was very dangerous for them, and they were not Aryans, not because of a Jewish background, but of the Russian background. My mother looked actually like a Georgian because my grandmother comes actually from Georgia. So we have a great mix in the family. So now we are here. That's also, I think, why they went to East Germany after the war. I think I never really spoke to my father. I was 9 when he died. And my mother didn't want to speak too much about these things, but my brother and I, we decided not to go to the communist youth movement, so we were the only ones in the school who were not, but they allowed us because, you know, in the army, we're also, because they called me there Genosse Graf in the beginning, and afterwards, not so much anymore because I voted against the constitution, all these funny things. Anyway, there's a lot of things, and then we managed to escape over the Baltic Sea in a freighter, East German freighter, which was loaded with military equipment for Vietnam. And we could jump ship on the North Sea. And so we survived it anyway. So now I'm here. The interesting is also for Germany is, of course, you know, when I finished and I did all these, I'm always quite good in university, I don't know why. But I mean, it was also LSE, I was at ENA in France. But there are only 10 enarchs from Germany always, but I was never invited. It had, of course, something to do with our mixed history in the back, and it was a time of all these spies and things like this one. So I had to work as a carpenter. I worked as a carpenter for some time in a theater because I learned in East Germany also carpentry. And then one day I got a letter from New York if I didn't want to start working there. I don't know. I have not applied. I've never applied to a job in my life, probably because if I had applied, I would never get one. But so I moved always from one job to the other. And my strengths was, I was not there as a candidate from the government. My strengths was, and I was for 8 years in the Security Council regularly, was to write assessments on wars, how wars proceed, in what direction they proceed, where there is a leverage for negotiations and this type of things.
How do you see, afterwards you became member, now you are a member of the European Parliament for Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht. It's a very interesting formation. It's more a leftist formation, but also against the mainstream, so it's somehow in between in the European Parliament. Why did you go to the European Parliament, and what is your experience in the European Parliament as a member of this?
I went to the European Parliament because of a decision of my wife. You know, I'm not member of any party. I was not a member of the BSW. I've never been one and will not be one. But Zara published my articles. I mean, or they asked if she can also publish them on their websites, and I've always written articles about these things, also Afghanistan and all these other things, and a lot about Iraq and things like this. So one day she called me if I don't want to go with a team, and then I said no, and then I told it my wife, because I get up always at 4 o'clock in the morning, at 9 o'clock I go to bed, and then that's where I meet my wife, yeah, at 9 o'clock, and I said, oh, you look, I just said I didn't go, and I thought she was very happy, we could finally have our retirement and do something nice, and she said, are you crazy, call her back, of course you go, blah, blah, blah. So I had to go, so I accepted in a parliament. I think for me the European Parliament is a shocking place. For somebody who has seen so many wars, to come to a place where people so easily talk about wars is a shock for me. I mean, these are all people who in the morning sip a coffee, take a warm shower, come to the parliament and vote for wars. I mean, all the resolutions on Ukraine are only about weapons and continuing the war. Not a single resolution added at least one paragraph on negotiations, on seeking some sort of way out through peaceful means. Not one of them. And this is, of course, for somebody who comes from my trade of work, and is of course, it is almost incomprehensible that I come to Europe and I find it more difficult in the parliament to talk about an alternative view, what we could do in Ukraine. There is just no discussion. Whereas when I look back on Iraq and Iran, which I use them as an example because they were from the magnitude a similar war with 1 million people dead, one could always talk, but not in Europe. And that is for me flabbergasting. I really don't know what to say. And especially that these people make these decisions knowing that it's going to be Ukrainian blood. It's not theirs. It's not their sons and their daughters. Shouldn't there be at least, even if they think they have to arm Ukraine against Russia, shouldn't there at least be an effort made to seek some sort of compromise, some sort of understanding? But we don't talk at all. We send weapons and we say we're making huge demands. We basically asked Russia to capitulate as the Europeans, as it will never happen, I think, and we refuse to talk. It is for me strange, yeah. So I don't like this European power. I mean, I in many ways I would actually agree with Matt. You know, I was also would save the nation state, I called it. You know, I was almost kicked out by all my friends because nation state is such an awful word, but I used nation state because I'm a strong and interesting enough because of my experience in Africa. I mean, they don't have states for a very long time. But if you go to Somalia and you see when the state completely collapses, who suffers most are the poor people. You know, if you have some money, you somehow manage to come into Europe. If you have a little less money in between, you manage to go to Kenya into a refugee camp where you are sure that you have at least some medical attention and food. But if you have nothing, you stay behind in this country where it's run by these mafiosi people. You know, people think that the only thing in this globalized world which could protect them and could protect their social system and their education and health systems is still the nation state. And you need always, for this to function, the two sides. You have to have a common solidarity. You have to have something common, identity, which allows you, which I call the nation. It doesn't have to. It has nothing to do with ethnicity. It's that you sort of
feel you belong together. And then the state, meaning the laws, the institutions, which depend on what type of nation they have. And I've written a book about these things. Because most of the wars are not like the interstate wars like in the Ukraine or now Iran. Most of them are intrastate wars where non-state actors fight governments, and where governments very often behave like non-state actors. These are completely different type of wars, but these are on the rise, and they're everywhere on the rise. The future is not the wars we see now. The future are these type of wars. We should give it much more thought, because the UN Charter has nothing about these wars, because at the time the UN Charter was decided, they did not think about wars inside the country. They only thought about the wars because of the First and Second World War among states.
How do you see Europe's future? We are very much talking about that it's a multipolar world. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Francis Fukuyama wrote, "End of history," that the democracy will win everywhere, so to say. And then now we see that there is a strong United States still. There is China and India on the rise, basically China almost on the same level as the United States. What is the role of Europe, and what is the future of Europe? And my next question will be after you answer this. How should Europe react on this situation?
Yeah, what I wanted to discuss here is how Europe could get out of two wars, one immediately outside Europe, and one inside Europe, which will basically determine their future, but on which they have no influence. I mean, Europe has virtually no influence, also not on Ukraine, on these things. So I think this is a situation that we have wars which will decide how we will live together in Europe, and how we prosper in Europe or not prosper. We have to get out. And my argument here is that we have not to concentrate on the Middle East, because Europe has no credibility over there. And these things are things which are better decided over there, but that we should focus on the European continent. We have first to get peace on the European continent. And if you want to do that, you will have to talk to Russia. And if you want to prevent that in the end we have a collapsing state, Ukraine, and we want to have a prosperous Ukraine, a sovereign Ukraine, a functioning Ukraine, you will also have to talk to Russia. That is bitter for many people, but this is what we always do. I mean, the first negotiations after the acceptance of 598 in the Iran-Iraq war was in my house, and we almost got all killed there because so many people are against these type of peace negotiations. But I mean, in the end, they talk to each other. And despite the fact that it was Iraq who attacked Iran, and it was Iraq who used mustard gas, and it was Iraq who used sarin gas, so very, very strong breaches of international law. In the end, they were talking. And in the end, who started the war, who is guilty, who pays reparations, play in these ceasefire or peace negotiations no role anymore. And that will be the same thing where we got stuck in the Ukraine war. We have to accept, we have to draw a line. If there's a war, the war has created certain reality. On this basis, we have to negotiate.
And if we look on the economic level, how will it affect the European Union? Because it is, I think, which is very much concerning a lot of people, that we are talking about the security issues, about the global security part of this situation. But if we look on the GDP, or if you look on the distribution of investments in the world, how much investment is coming from the east to the west and vice versa, it is very much in a change. Do you see how we can reverse this development, or shall we reverse this development, and we should accept that that's the new global situation?
Yeah, of course, the global situation is changing, and we have to find our place in it. But I can tell you, Europe, or the EU, or the 27 countries which mark the EU, will not be able to solve these issues you just mentioned, economic issues, the issues of competitiveness, the issues of technology, the issues of guarding social standards and things like this for education, health. They will not do that unless we solve the issue of war and peace on the European continent. It is a priority. It will mean peace is never a just peace. So there is no such thing, like there is no just war. But we have to find a way of settling these issues. And I have prepared a peace plan with General Kuyat, who is was once the highest general in the German army. And there was an interesting combination, military and UN. And you know what we said, that we have to start to do 2 confidence-building measures, because otherwise we are not able to talk to each other. And the first one is that the first objective on this one must be that we have to understand we have a common responsibility for peace in Europe. And we should then agree that our objective is to maintain Ukraine as a sovereign, independent European state, irrespective of the territorial issues. And the third one is that we have to find a new security system in Europe that takes care of the security needs of Ukraine and Russia, but also is the founding stone for a European peace and security system. And this is not all that difficult, because in 1990, we signed all, including the United States and Canada, the Charter of Paris for a new Europe. And we had subsequent in the OSCE certain documents which have the standard of international law, in which we agreed on all these things, how that should be. The interesting thing is, in 1990, when we had this agreement, how we wanted to work together without any new division lines and all the rest of it, which has now become, one word was not present in any of these documents of the OSCE, and that was NATO. NATO was not part of the proposed solution. And therefore, we have to go back and see, isn't there another way to have security? I don't think that arms in the ultimate will give us more security. I think when more and more states follow what the European says, this Roman saying we use now all the time, if you want to have peace, you prepare for war, which actually means that each state has to arm always higher and higher until they reach a nuclear bomb. We would sit on a powder cake of nuclear bombs in many countries, and I don't think I would call this security. I think we have enough rationale among us, if we are respectful to others, if we accept the differences, to find a solution. And there is simply no other way to this.
Let's go back to the question when we were talking about that and if I know some of your papers and some of your texts, that you followed very closely how the negotiations, the first negotiations between Russia and Ukraine were in Turkey. Why was it misleaded? What happened there? If you can share some of the insights you have.
Yeah, I was involved in this a little bit. I mean, I'm a small guy. I don't pretend that I did big things, but it was asked also by Schröder and these people, because I do these things quite a lot. The interesting thing is that Russia and Ukraine did exactly what is demanded in the UN Charter. That means they started a conflict, which became a war. A war is a conflict also. And they immediately sat down and negotiated how they could end it. And they came up with a 10-point plan in Istanbul. The 10-point plan was prepared by Ukrainian diplomats, by Ukraine, and Russia accepted it at the time. It was not the peace plan, but it had the large outline of what peace should be there. By the way, there was no territorial issues there, except for the Crimea, where they decided that for 15 years it should remain under Russian administration, but during the time they find a diplomatic solution. The number 3 was, by the way, that Russia would agree to support Ukraine to become member of the European Union. All these type of things. This is an amazing document for us. When you look, friends who, because all the peace treaties are always placed at the United Nations. And when you look what happened since the Second World War, we have not a single example that in such a quick time there was such an agreement. So it was a stellar achievement, especially of the Ukrainian diplomacy. And there's also something else I want to say to this one, because at the time, you know, NATO had a special summit on 24 of March. It means 5 days before the final agreement on the things. And there, they rejected any agreement between Ukraine and Russia. It could only be done after Russia withdraws all its troops, which would mean that Ukraine would, of course, become member of NATO immediately, and so on. So Zelensky tried long time to defend it. He gave an interview to The Economist on, I might not get all the dates, but 2 days before, in which he said the memorable phrase, and I repeat it now out of my head, you know, that he says our Western friends would like to continue the war in order to weaken Russia, even if it means the demise, and he used the word demise of Ukraine and the blood of Ukrainians. And that's exactly what's happening. So I think that is a great pity that we didn't vote. If I look, for instance, on the peace agreement for Afghanistan on the Petersburg, I mean, we had, I think, 10 times as more Western diplomats there than we had Afghans. In Istanbul, not a single one came. We didn't want this agreement to work. And that is something that in that time, it is very heavy on our shoulders, very heavy, because this is what we have all agreed in the charter that we would do. So why did we walk away from it? Why did Johnson went on 7 April to Kiev and says you can't do it because otherwise, and that's what even written in The Guardian, otherwise you lose all our support. So then we continued the war. The war was not continued by rejecting it. It was simply this whole thing collapsed because Ukraine stopped answering anymore. And that's also why the Russians always come back to this. I don't think this Istanbul thing is we can do again. We suggest with create something else. But this is a great tragedy. That's a great tragedy. And I think that in all, when we look at the European Union, why has the European Union as a peace project not supported this? Why has the European Union given up on Minsk II to be implemented? Why did the European Union did not stick to the agreement the 3 foreign ministers did in 2014 for getting elections in 3 months? And Merkel called on the next day the new government after it was overthrown going with weapons into the radar. I mean, why did we do that? We had the options, but we didn't do it. So I think in history, we'll put much of the blame for this war on us. I have no doubt about these things.
I would ask the audience to write me questions. Here is the Slido code, the event code. I already received some questions. For example, Robert is asking, what do you think how a just peace settlement for the Russia-Ukrainian war would look like? So basically, how it can be finished now, or what can happen?
Let me say something about wars. You know, we in the West, we argue always very morally about these things. You know, it's all moral arguments. And it's true. All wars are moral. You say in English, amoral, not moral. But they are not about morals. They're about interests. They are about interests. You know, the head of the butterfly. They're about interests. And this Ukrainian war, the war in Ukraine, is a typical Clausewitz war, in the sense that we could not before agree with Russia, or we didn't even refuse to negotiate with Russia their security concerns about a NATO which came closer and closer to their border. We rejected it many times. I mean, we know from a long time that Russia would react it, that many great people, I mean, Kissinger is of the blacklist of the Ukrainians because he said we should negotiate and things like this one. So I think we have a lot of these things, and we didn't do that. Why is the European Union not done this? Why? We had the Charter of Paris, which said something else. Why didn't we refer to this? So it is something which is heavily on the EU. And that's also why we stuck today. When you see the position most European states, not all, take, then it's the position of the extraordinary NATO summit on 24 March 22, in which it said no negotiations, withdrawal of things, paying reparations, special court, and things like this one. So this is basically what you demand after being in the 5th year of the war, that Russia capitulates. And I think that is not realistic. I mean, you might continue, no? But that's also why we in the European Union want the war to continue. That's why we need the 90 billion euros there, and so on. But this has an enormous risk. I know that people think we can still win the war. I don't know. Of course, the war is over when it's over. But I have my great doubts because, you see, what is happening, that the United States withdraws from the war. And with the Iraq war, it will even withdraw more from the war. And even the weapons we want to buy from the United States for the Ukrainians, we might not get anymore because there's a competition on these weapon productions for different wars. And the war in the Middle East is for the Americans far more important than the Ukrainian war. So Europe stands there alone. And Europe has not the financial nor the military means to support a war in Ukraine. And so if all the promises we make on the security guarantees, on the coalition of the willing, I mean, these are empty things. It will not happen. And so I think there is a war continued, which is better negotiate, because when we look at all the times one could have negotiated, with every time the negotiation position of Ukraine has become weaker. So I think that's not a good thing. I personally think that we could get through diplomacy concessions, because the biggest problem Russia will have, or Putin when we want, I don't like these personalized things, oh, it's too much, is that he has to finalize it somehow. And you know, the experience from war negotiations is that the one who's winning in the war is more for peace negotiations than the one who's losing. Because a loser will have to accept certain losses, whereas the other one wants to stabilize what he has won. So Russia will negotiate, and I'm sure there will be compromises if the situation afterwards is stable. But if the European Union continues to say that Ukraine should become member of NATO, I mean, there can't be any negotiations. That has nothing to do with what we think about Russia. It just doesn't happen.
One more question from the audience is that does implying Ukraine bears responsibility for the war overlook the branch of the territorial integrity and the fundamental principles of international law?
If the Ukraine is at fault?
No. If I think the question tries to formulate that the territorial, if there is a peace, then the territorial integrity of Ukraine is lost. So it means that there will be on the ground of the fundamental principles of international law, there's difficult to make a real peace. Or we should accept the will of power, so to say, that there is a stand in this situation of the war. And I think but you had this discussion with our other guest is also basically a bit about where is this thin line between you have the international law, and on the basis of this, how is it to make peace? And on the other side, look, it doesn't work. and then how to make peace.
Yeah, I mean,
if I understand it
yeah,
correctly.
no, okay. You know, let's look at Serbia. Kosovo was part of Serbia, and we went to war to separate it. And so I think we made a sort of peace there. It was an amnesty, an agreement signed under military pressure by Serbia to give up these territories. And I think there's no way anybody would, by real sense, argue that it should go back to Serbia. At least I don't. The reason is that the majority in this part is Albanian and doesn't want to be part of Serbia. So this could have been prevented maybe in a peaceful way, but once it comes to a war, these things happen. And I think that happens also in the eastern part. When you look at the elections since '91, since independence, you will always have in the eastern part people voting up to 80% for Russia. And that means that today we cannot really think that these population and these territories could be reintegrated into Ukraine. By the way, I have contact with Ukrainians, and I'm telling them exactly the same. You know, there is a lot in Western Ukraine, people who think it might be even better not to have these territories. These territories were annexed, were added to the Ukraine in 1922 by Stalin. And exactly they were annexed because Stalin wanted to have a greater share of Russian population in Ukraine in order to control it. So if one loses, or it would not all, but loses these parts, it might even create a more stable Ukraine, and so it might be even further. In any case, once you have a war and you cannot militarily change it anymore, and I don't think we can, at least not for now, then you have to accept the fact of wars. You know, when you go back to Clausewitz, when we go to war, it's a continuation of politics with other means, in this case with military means. That means you couldn't politically decide a difference, a conflict you have, and you take war now to decide. You know, it's like in the pub. You know, you can't even finally start fist fighting. So one is on the floor, the other one has won. This is unfortunately, I'm absolutely against wars, and that's also I think an argument why we shouldn't have wars and we should find always peaceful solution before it comes to it. But once you have war, the war makes decisions. It creates realities. It creates realities. In the Middle East, it will be the same thing. The war will create realities. And if you want to go back to peace, you have to accept first what realities the war has created. There will be no other way around it, unless you make a nuclear war and say, but then we all die. I mean, this is what it is. And again, don't get me wrong. I'm against this type of solutions. But I'm against war, and because war creates these sort of alternatives. And once we have it, there will be we can't go any other way.
I'm very happy because we have loads of questions now. Your co-patriot.
I have to, by the way, I have a flight immediately. So I escaped afterwards all the rust.
We don't let you go. We still have 20 minutes. So we have a lot of questions. We take care of your flight. So you will reach it. Or if not, then I don't know, we organize it somehow. So, but there is a very important question. Your co-patriot, Angela Merkel, said that the Minsk agreement was an excuse to allow Ukraine to rearm. Hollande confirmed. Do you confirm? It's a question
I don't.
From Anonymous.
No, I don't think at the time Merkel negotiated made false negotiations. I don't think it was the case. Unfortunately, we see that now also because he might become president of Germany, that she makes concessions by speaking to the things, because she was accused of, with the Minsk agreement, to have listened too much to the Russians. Although the Minsk agreement would have been good for Ukraine because it would not mean any loss of territory. It just would mean that certain parts have certain autonomy, which is in many countries the case. No, I think she makes this. Yeah, I think she is driven. Yeah, it's not very nice what she says. I mean, it's actually, if it's true what she says, it means that we have at the very highest level negotiated under false pretense. This I've heard never before at this level of discussions. I'm not saying that didn't happen before, but that somebody admits to it, I've never heard before. Maybe there is, but I don't know. I think it's awful, actually.
Given the veto power of the UN Security Council, to which extent is the UN not based on big power logics?
Yeah, the Security Council. You know, I think the veto power is a good thing, as long as only superpowers have it. And the reason why it was introduced at the time is that you can't decide to go under Article 7 to war against the United States in the Security Council, or the Soviet Union at the time, or China. This is not the problem. I've been for 8 years regularly in the Security Council, and even if we have no decision what we see outside, there are enormous discussions in the Security Council behind closed doors where people are extremely respectful and civil with each other, which they are suddenly not anymore, and there's a camera and the things. But there is otherwise. And I tell you this, Security Council simply talking to each other, even if there's no decision, or public decision, a resolution or something like this one, has helped to diffuse much of the global problem. It is a marvelous thing. What the problem we have in the Security Council is who is a permanent member. Of course, at the time, Great Britain and France were great powers, but they no longer are. And now we have India, we have Brazil or whatever, Indonesia, whatever. We have bigger countries there, more important countries, and that will have to change. We have to make a world going back in which only great powers have this right. I want also to add, the idea was that these great powers therefore have also a greater responsibility for upholding the UN Charter, and this is probably what has not happened.
But how do you want to do it? Because, okay, there are powers who are members. Who is telling you are now great power, you are not anymore? And who is telling to the other, so please now leave because you are weak now? So who will tell
I would like to tell them this. No, I don't know. It's a decision making. You know, like we changed also Taiwan, China to mainland China and things like this one. So these things are possible. These are very difficult, of course, no? Because also it changes the composition of the Security Council between, let's say, the white North and the rest of the world, which is not now according to population. You know, we have, if we include Russia, we have permanent members are 4, which are white, and the 3 if they are NATO. And when you look that we have, I don't know, there are these groupings, Western Europe and Eastern Europe, I think it's 2 and 3, another 5 are things. So we have then NATO countries now. We have these 5, sometimes there's not NATO country among them, but usually they're NATO countries. And we have then the 3 in the Security Council. Means 8 of 15 are Western powers, Western countries. And of course, that doesn't reflect the reality anymore. If you take the population of all NATO states together, it's something like 11% today, and it's declining. And so what happens to the other 85%? And I think that's the great challenge of the UN, not the issue whether or not we have veto powers.
How is the EU balancing its identity as peace project with the need for strategic autonomy and in-chase military capabilities?
You know, when I see such a question, then I have to ask back, what do you mean by the UN? What do you mean by the UN? The UN are 193 members.
It was about the EU. The EU. How is the EU?
How
is the EU balancing its identity between a peace project and having military capacities?
Now what we call the common foreign and security policy is actually a misnomer, because foreign and security policy is squarely a national issue in the European Union. What is common is that we put somebody there who is called Kaja Kallas, who is supposed to help coordinate the responses by the states, which doesn't happen. There's something very interesting happening in the last week in the European Union. I think it was a lunch of EU ambassadors, to which Mrs. von der Leyen did not appear and sent her head of office only. She always feels that she is a president of the whole thing. She was told that there will be no fast track membership for Ukraine. That they do in closed sessions. There will be no fast track. It must be a devastating decisions for the Ukraine. So they contradicted von der Leyen, and she was criticized of making such promises, although it was not in her mandate to make such promises. Now, I think 2 or 3 days ago, we had the same in the EU Parliament, when the deputies from Mr. Macron sort of stood up and very violently attacked von der Leyen, that they had enough with her. I mean, really strong language. And it was about a press release she issued in respect to the Iran war. And they objected to her because she is not entitled to issue such press releases. We always think that's the EU things. It is member states. But if you look at these two, and very heavily that she takes on, competences is given by the treaties, no? That she takes, for the whole rearm Europe is a breach of the competences. It's not her, it's a national competence. It's not an EU competence. And there are many other things, like the sanctions policy. So I think we will see a change here, back, that the nation states take back responsibility for certain core competences, which in the first Corona and then now with the war in Ukraine, sort of have conveniently gone over to the Commission. The other side of this one is, and that's what I think at least is, it means also that there will be no common policy. Now, if these criticism of her is that she cannot make decisions, it has to be a common decision by all 27 states. How can you make such a decision by 27 states in an environment in which there is a war in Ukraine and there's a war in front of our doorsteps in Iran, and you might have to decide relatively quickly and very clearly? It will not happen. So I think we have now a European, I once wrote that the Ukraine war might spell the dissolution of the EU as it is today, and I still believe it. And I think if I see this one, you basically say that the European Union will not be represented outside as a joint bloc, and they might not be able to get to common decisions.
How do you see Hungary's role? Because Hungary is often seen within this European Union that you described as somehow a different member that has different goals, that has different objectives, that has different imaginations or ideas about, for example, how to make peace in Ukraine. How do you judge this and how do you see this?
Okay, let me just say that I'm not misunderstood. Politically, Bobby, I'm very different to Prime Minister Orban. But on the peace issue, I'm squarely behind them. When we met our peace proposal, we said the European Union, we meant states, not the European Union as an institution, must take the leads to speak with Russia. There is no way around it. People who are enemies must talk. That's what peace talks are about. And we have not a single head of government who has done this. The exception is only Orban. And I think, from my point of view, we should all have been happy that he does it. I mean, of course, there is no solution in the one thing, but you have to start somehow the discourse. You have to. When you think you don't have to, we have to, because Europe needs, or EU Europe needs peace more than Russia nowadays, I think. So we have to do this for our own good, not because we take Russia understanding or what we are accused of. No, it's for our own good. We have to solve the issue on the European continent. And for this one, I'm grateful to him. But I want also to say something else. I was sitting in the parliament during the Hungarian presidency when the Prime Minister Orban came to the parliament. How he was received there. I mean, I didn't say anything because I was really shocked. I mean, he is an elected head of government of a member state. And the president of the commission, which is really an administrative, operational job, talks to him down in a way as if she was the president of the United States of Europe. But she is not. You know, to a certain degree, first of all, she is not even elected in the same way. Yeah, democratic credentials, not because it's a functional job. And so to talk to him like this one, I found really shocking. And then there came a lady in red, which turned out to be a co-chair of the Greens. I don't know why she was wearing red, but she was red. And she really went over her top and says, Mr. Orban, we don't want you here in the parliament, you have to go, blah, 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 to an elected head of state for starting peace negotiations. We have to understand this. And the president of the parliament, which cuts our telephone, our microphone off with any minutes, you know, didn't interfere. Allowed in the parliament the elected head of government of a member state to be insulted in such a way in parliament. You know, and I think if one wants to know what is the problem of the European Union, in this one, you have the problem. And I must say, when I saw that, I had always to think about Pope Leo XIV's words, where he said, history will belong to the peacemakers and not to the warmongers. And I hope very much that he will be right.
Thank you very much. One last question. I have to decide because we received so many things. Okay, there are a lot of questions about when will be peace in Ukraine. This is probably one of the things which Hungarians very much affected to, of course, because we have also a Hungarian minority who is very much suffering under this war. There are a lot of them in the fronts. In your observation, when can be peace made in Ukraine? How long shall we calculate with the situation we have currently now in our eastern borders?
I have no idea. But I tell you, peace in Ukraine will depend on member states of the European Union, which is the greatest bloc in Europe, to move. They will have to move. They will have to accept, like Iran had to accept the Ukrainians, even if you didn't like, and they didn't like each other at all. We had always go in between because for a long time they wouldn't even talk to each other and things like this one. This is going to happen here too. I mean, if we agree on certain principles in advance, and I think we can, and I'm sure that Russia will also agree to this one. The problem is us, and the problem is that we have a leadership present in the European Union who is not only not willing, but I fear also not capable of doing this move.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And I think you will catch your plane. Thank you very much for your time, and I wish everybody a pleasant afternoon and bon appetit for the lunch. And I hope that even the afternoon will be with such good discussions and lectures.
I have to go now to the plane without the lunch. This is why we talk so long. Okay.